The waves crashed against the cliffs of the Château d'If with a sound that echoed like muffled thunder, a rhythm that had become the only clock in Pierre Duval's life. He had long since stopped marking the days on a cell wall. The chalk had run out years ago, and besides, time in a place like this didn't move forward. It coiled around itself, a snake eating its own tail. Pierre had been brought to the island fortress in the spring of 1812, though the exact day escaped him now. He'd been a customs officer in Marseille once, an ordinary man with an ordinary life. But ordinary lives, he had learned, were fragile things. They could be crushed easily under the boots of men with ambition. His arrest had come swiftly, the charges vague. Espionage, conspiracy, treason, words that had sounded foreign and absurd to him when first uttered in court. No trial, no witnesses, no defense. A whisper in the ear of a magistrate had been enough to bury him alive within stone walls. At first, he had begged for mercy, written letters to every official he could think of. They were never answered. Then, he shouted his innocence to the guards. They ignored him. Then he prayed. Eventually, he stopped doing even that. The Château d'If was a place designed to erase men, not just imprison them. The air was thick with salt and mold. The sea wind screamed through the cracks in the walls like a ghost demanding to be let in. But the cruelest thing was the sound of laughter that drifted from the guards' quarters. Laughter, the one thing a prisoner could not have. It was in his 5th year that Pierre first heard the tapping. At first, he thought it was the echo of his own madness, the final betrayal of a mind too long caged. But the sound persisted, steady, deliberate. He pressed his ear to the damp stone and realized it came from the cell next to his. He tapped back, uncertainly. A pause, then a reply. Weeks passed before the two men managed to scrape a hole through the wall wide enough to pass a note. The stranger's name was Abbé Jacques Fournier, a priest imprisoned for treason against the crown, though he spoke with a quiet conviction that suggested his guilt was nothing more than defying the wrong man. Over months, the two men spoke through the wall. The abbé taught Pierre languages, mathematics, philosophy, anything to keep their minds alive. But it wasn't just education the priest offered. In the low tones of a confessor, he told Pierre of a hidden fortune, a treasure buried long ago on the island of Monte Cristo by a nobleman fleeing political retribution. It was a story that should have sounded absurd, yet Pierre clung to it. Hope, he discovered, was a currency far more valuable than gold in a place like this. The abbé died before he could escape. A fever took him one winter's night, and by dawn, his cell was silent. Pierre wept until his throat was raw. But when the guards came to remove the body, an idea, a terrible, desperate idea, took root in his mind. He switched places with the corpse, wrapping himself in the burial shroud. When they threw the body into the sea, it was the dead priest who remained behind, and Pierre who rose from the water, coughing and gasping like a man reborn. He was found by fishermen, delirious and half-starved. When they asked who he was, he told them nothing. A new name formed on his tongue, as naturally as breath. Edmond, he said. Edmond Valence. Years later, when Pierre Duval no longer existed and Edmond Valence had become a man of wealth and mystery, he returned to Marseille under disguise. The treasure had been real, more real than anything he could have imagined. With it, he bought the silence of those who had once scorned him and the downfall of those who had betrayed him. He moved like a shadow through the salons and parlors of Paris, charming the elite by day, destroying them by night. But revenge, he discovered, is not a clean satisfaction. It is a hunger that feeds on itself. Each enemy's fall brought not peace, but a deeper emptiness. The man who had once dreamed of freedom now lived in a prison of another kind, built not of stone, but of vengeance. When, in his final years, he confessed his tale to a visiting writer named Alexandre, he did not use his real name. He called himself the Count. The writer listened with fascination, scribbling notes late into the night. He would later turn the story into a legend, a tale of betrayal, escape, and justice beyond the grave. But the truth, the real truth, was that the man behind the story was no noble count. He was Pierre Duval, a forgotten prisoner who had clawed his way out of the sea and into myth. And as the waves crashed endlessly against the Chateau d'If, they whispered his name still, carrying it into eternity, like the echo of a story that refused to die. Pierre's story did not end with vengeance. It merely changed its shape. After his return from the dead, the world itself seemed foreign to him. Marseille had grown noisier, more decadent. The ports bustled with merchants and soldiers, the smell of salt and iron thick in the air. Yet beneath the familiar chatter, Pierre sensed the same poison that had destroyed his life: greed, envy, and ambition hiding behind powdered faces and perfumed smiles. He walked among his betrayers like a phantom. His former superior, Captain Leclerc, who had once accused him of conspiracy, was now a fat, trembling official, his eyes yellowed by years of drink. Pierre, now calling himself the Count of Monte Cristo, visited him under the guise of an investor from Paris. The captain didn't recognize him. Time and wealth had transformed Pierre into someone unrecognizable, his face leaner, his voice steadier. They shared brandy as Pierre listened to the man boast about his honorable service to the crown. When the captain awoke the next morning, his fortune had vanished, transferred, with surgical precision, into charities and debtors' accounts. 2 weeks later, Leclerc's name appeared in the newspapers: suicide by pistol. The others fell just as quietly. The magistrate who had signed Pierre's imprisonment died in disgrace after his family was ruined by forged letters and false accusations. The merchant who had courted Pierre's fiancée while he rotted in the chateau was found penniless, his business consumed by mysterious market forces. Each downfall was engineered with the precision of an artist finishing a masterpiece. Pierre's revenge was not loud. It was patient, beautiful, and cruel. And yet, each victory left him emptier than the last. The treasure that had once symbolized freedom became a curse, a constant reminder of how much he had lost. He had dreamed, during those years in the cell, of walking again under the open sky, of hearing laughter, of holding someone who could remind him he was still human. But when freedom finally came, he realized he no longer knew how to live it. He bought a grand estate near Paris, filled it with books, art, and silence. Servants came and went, whispering that their master spoke to no one, that he dined alone, staring into the fire for hours. At night, he would pace the halls, haunted not by ghosts, but by the memory of the man he used to be, the customs officer who had once believed in justice. One evening, as the lamps flickered in his study, he received an unexpected visitor. A young journalist, thin, bright-eyed, with ink stains on his cuffs, asked for an interview. He had heard rumors, he said, of a mysterious man who had risen from nothing to unimaginable wealth. Pierre almost sent him away. But something in the young man's manner, a kind of restless curiosity, reminded him of the Abbé Fournier, the man who had once given him hope in the darkness. They spoke for hours. The journalist's name was Alexandre Dumas. He listened, enraptured, as Pierre recounted his story, not every detail, but enough. The false arrest, the imprisonment, the priest, the treasure, the vengeance. Dumas wrote quickly, his quills scratching like the pulse of time itself. But when Pierre finished, he did not smile. "Do not write it as it happened," he said quietly. "Write it as it should have happened." Dumas frowned. "What do you mean?" Pierre's eyes drifted toward the window, where the moon glowed over the dark gardens. "Let him find peace at the end," he said. "Let your count learn what I did not, that revenge is a wound that never heals, and that freedom means nothing if you lose yourself to it." Dumas nodded, though he didn't yet understand. When the story was finally published, The Count of Monte Cristo became a sensation, an epic of betrayal and redemption. Readers called it fiction, but those who had truly listened to Pierre's voice between the lines sensed something deeper, something real. Years later, when Dumas learned that the mysterious benefactor who had once visited him had died alone in his estate, he attended the burial quietly, without fanfare. There was no family to mourn, no name on the stone, only a small inscription carved by the caretaker, who had found it written on a slip of paper among the man's belongings. And though the world remembered the Count of Monte Cristo as the tale of Edmond Dantès, the ghost of Pierre Duval lingered in every line, a forgotten soul who had traded one kind of captivity for another, whose suffering gave birth to one of the greatest stories ever told. Sometimes, when the Mistral winds sweep across the old fortress of the Château d'If, sailors claim to hear a faint tapping beneath the waves, steady, deliberate, like two prisoners still speaking through the walls of time.